Today's project is gonna be awesome. We're making a cuff bracelet. Hello everyone, welcome to another tutorial. Today's project is going to be great. We're making a cuff bracelet and we're going to be using wire wrap styles, but it's going to be a wire-smithed bracelet, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So if you are ready to get started, let me show you what we're going to be making, and then we'll talk about tools, materials, and then we'll get to the project. So let's go. So I wanted to start by showing you just exactly what it is we're going to be making, and this is a piece that I made for my wife. She chose this stone. It's a nice big giant piece of fordite. I think it's about 3 inches long. But this is what we're going to be making. This should just give you an idea. We're going to be making this wrap that wraps all of our wires together, prong wires, as well as all of the bracelet wires that we're going to be doing. Remember, when we're wire smithing, we're going to be doing a little secret underneath here of cutting this area, wrapping it with some good wire, and we'll form the prongs, and we'll make everything that we need here. The only difference is that I added some additional wires, and I'll show you where I've added those wires in to make this little extra piece, and that just helps show you the versatility of this piece. But this is what we're making. We're going to be making a nice cuff bracelet that's really a good secure piece. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what we're going to be doing. So if you're ready, let's go ahead and we'll talk about the materials we'll need for this project. So the materials for this piece are really rather simple. I'm using copper, as you can see, because of the stone we're using. Now this is a cabochon, nice green stone that we're going to be using. It is a 40 millimeter by 25. I'm going to recommend, though, and also in the comments under all of the tools and the materials, I recommend using a 40 by 30. The measurements that I'll be doing for this 40 by 25 and a 40 by 30 are exactly the same. The piece will come out exactly the same whether you're using this stone or the regular 40 by 30, okay? But this is the stone I'm going to be using, so you'll be seeing this a lot. I thought that would pair really well with copper. I think it's going to look really good in copper. So we're going to be using copper wire. This is 18 gauge square wire, and we're going to be using that for the frame. So here's our prong wires, and here's our arm wires, or the bracelet wires for this. And we'll talk about that in just a minute as far as cutting it and getting it ready. To wrap everything together, we're going to need 18 gauge half round, half hard wire. I prefer half hard in this half round because I think it gives a little more strength in the wrap, and we'll be using that. I'll show you on our sample piece. That's what we're going to be using here. Now, I didn't use 18 gauge on this. This is actually 20 gauge that I used here, but 18 gauge to do this area here, half hard will work perfectly for this piece. So those are the materials. Nothing too out of the ordinary, very simple materials we'll be using. So now let's get to the tools that we'll need for this. Let's go. The tools for this project are very basic. You'll need flat nose pliers. You'll need your wire cutters as usual. We've got to be able to cut our wire away and off of the spool and everything, so we'll need those. Chain nose pliers to get into those hard to reach areas. Our best friend, Mr. Painter Tape. We'll need some painter's tape to hold everything together. For this project, this is essential because we're going to have several wires going several directions, and to keep everything organized and to keep everything together, this is a necessity. And of course, scissors to be able to cut the tape into the lengths that we'll need. To form the bracelet, I'm going to be using my ring mandrel. If you have a bracelet mandrel, that will work great. Something else that can work also are vegetable cans to shape the the outside of our bracelet, the bracelet arms of this, you need something to be able to make that shape. I'm going to be using this, but whatever round thing you get, whether it's a can or whether you have a bracelet mandrel, that works out great. A file. You're going to need a flat file of some sort. I'm using a triangle file because it's got 3 flat sides on it. This is to cut this groove. Remember we talked about this wrap here? Well, underneath here, I used a file to cut across all of the wires to be able to do the wrap, set the wrap in it to make the wrap secure so that everything doesn't move around. And we'll do that with a file. And to be able to wrap or to mark everything out, you'll also need a fine tip permanent marker to be able to mark the wire, to know where to put your wraps and to where to cut certain things. So you'll definitely need this. And also a rawhide mallet. We may be using this in conjunction with whatever we're using to form and shape the arms to the bracelet, because we're going to hammer against this to make those nice shapes. It may be necessary. We'll see as we go whether we will need that or not. So that's pretty much everything we're going to need for this. If you're ready to get started, let's start cutting some wire and putting all this together. Here we go. So for this project, we're going to need approximately 38 inches of 18 gauge square wire. That's what I've got here. I've already cut all of my wires. So for the bracelet arms itself, I have 4 wires cut at 8 inches each. And then for the prongs, I have 2 of these cut at 3 inches each. How did I come up with that? Well, I'm using a 40 millimeter stone for this. I usually like to get about another inch or 2 more than I need on this because I want to have room to be able to move these wires out around the stone and to be able to bring them up over the stone and hold everything in securely. So I generally will do about an extra inch longer than the stone, an inch, maybe an inch and a half. So 40 millimeters, cutting these at 3 inches each, will give you plenty of wire to do that, okay? So now let's set everything up. Now, what we're going to do is after you cut all of your wire, I want you to straighten each wire, and we want them to be relatively straight. They don't have to be perfectly straight. So go through each one and just smooth it out with your fingertips. If you need to, if you've got sensitive fingertips, use a cloth. Sometimes using like a sunshine cloth, which will clean the wire, will help, or just any cloth that you have to run it over this so that you don't damage your fingertips. Mine are so calloused that this doesn't bother me. I've been doing it like that for years. So we're just straightening each one of these wires by running it through our fingertips. There, so those are relatively straight. And we're going to do the same thing with our prong wires. And we're going to do those both till they're relatively straight. And all I do is I just apply a little bit of back pressure against the bend that's in it to bring it all back into center. Okay, there we go. So the first thing we want to do is we want to mark all of the centers of each of these wires. And we'll start with our prong wires. And we're going to set our scale here. Let's kind of kill some of the glare we have. Whoops. Move, there we go. So that gets rid of some of our glare. I'm going to take my fine tip permanent marker and I'm going to set this against it. I'm going to mark the center at 1.5 inches because remember these are 3 inches long. So there is one wire. And then let's do the other one. It's about right there. This is just going to set everything up. Now, for these other wires, they're 8 inches each. So we're going to mark the centers on these at 4 inches. So there's 1, Here is number 2. Number 3. And our last one, number 4. At 4 inches. So each one of these is now set up with a center mark. The next thing you want to do is you want to take some painter's tape. Let's bring our light back in so we can see better. Take your painter's tape, and I want you to pull off about a 2-inch piece. Here we go. And I want you to take, and I want you to cut, it right down the middle. So let's get back into frame here, and we will cut this right down the middle and just stick it to your work surface right next to you so you can get to it. So now I want you to take your 2 prong wires. These are going to be in the center. And I want you to find the centering marks and match up the centers. So here's our center marks. We're going to match that up. And now we're going to start adding these other wires. So to the outside, to each side, so the outside, we're going to start on the right. Take that centering mark, and I want you to line that one up. This is one of the longer 8-inch wires. And we're going to do the same thing with the second one. We're going to set up that center mark. So now we've got 2 on the right of our prong wires. Now let's do 2 to the left of our prong wires. So holding them in place, now we're going to put 2 of these on the left side of our prong wires. We're making a wire bundle. Okay, there's one of them, and here is our last one. Got them all lined up, except for now I'm rolling things around a little bit too much. There we go. So all of our wires should now meet in the center. And then take one of your pieces of tape, and I want you to now, off camera, I went ahead and I made this center line. I leveled it out. These are all relatively centered. Everything's centered, but we want to have this nice center line very distinct. Because what we're going to do is we're going to use this center line here to mark out the center wrap. So let me show you on our test piece here. Here's our center wrap. This is the main wrap on this piece. And we're going to lay this out so that, I'm trying to find a good angle so you can see in here. There you go. But we're going to center this on the stone. To do that, we need to know how long the stone is. So we're using a 40mm long stone. A good rule for this to give it enough stability on here is you want to make a wrap about half the length of the stone. So if we've got a 20mm stone, we're going to make, if we have a 40mm stone, excuse me, we want to make a 20mm wrap, center wrap here. So I have a ruler, it's got millimeters on it, and I'm going to center it on 10mm. Okay, why 10mm? 10mm is half of 20. See, I'm a math genius. You didn't know that, did you? So we're going to center that there, and we're going to make a mark to the right of our center mark at 20. That goes all the way across all of our wires. And then we're going to make one to the left at the 0, which is 10mm from the center mark. So now we've got 3 marks on here. This is going to be our wrap area. And before we wrap that, we're going to cut it with a file. We're going to cut into this to give a groove. The reason why is our wires will have a tendency to want to move like this. If we just wrapped this centerpiece, they would have a tendency to move. And over time, the piece would become very unstable. And it would be kind of doing like this. To keep all the wires from doing that, we're going to cut into here just ever so slightly so that the wrap wire will sit down in that groove, giving it a shoulder to prevent that moving. That shoulder on here will prevent that. So if we centered this piece on here, if we centered our stone in here, there's where we're going to make that wrap. So let's go ahead and we'll now pull out our trusty flat file, and I'll show you how to cut the groove in here. Let's do that. So I've got my file out. Now you can use either a flat file. I prefer to use this triangle file because it's got these nice sharp triangle edges on it. And what I generally will do is I will take one of those edges and I will file across the two outside lines. Just give that a nice file. See the bright spot in that now? That will give me a good spot so I won't go outside of it. And I'll do the same thing with the other end of this. These are the ends of the wrap. So I'll do the same thing over here. I will use that. Now you can use a flat file to do this, and that will cut right in there. If you put it on its edge, it will cut into that. But so I've got, these are the two end points of my wrap. Now I'm going to take my file and on its flat end, and I'm going to start filing across all of those wires, all the way across. Okay, so I'm going to cut this groove in there. The good thing about using copper's kind of a soft wire, soft metal, so cutting this will tend to be a little bit easier to do. So you want to make sure you cut this. Now this takes a few minutes. Keep working at it until you get all the way across. And you may have to turn it around to get the angle, but you want to try and get this as evenly cut as you possibly can, okay? So I'm going to finish this up off camera. Okay, so off camera I really did a lot of this work because it's like watching paint dry, watching somebody file across here, but you'll notice this bright area is where I filed across, and the wires will kind of spread a little bit because you're moving them around with filing them. So all I could do is kind of straighten them back out. You want to be careful not to cut too deep into it. You can't really tell that there's a shoulder here, but there is just a slight difference in this that you might be able to see, that there's just a slight shoulder right here that our wrap wire is going to sit against. This is an important step in this. You can go ahead and make this without cutting into it, but over time, as I said, this will loosen the wire up ever so slightly and things will start to move around. But I like to make a good secure piece. So this is the cut area. Let's now move on to the next section, which is we're going to add a wrap wire to this. So let's do that now. To wrap this, we're going to use some of this 18 gauge half round wire. Now we've cut a 20 millimeter wide section here. So we're going to need probably, I'd say, 16 inches of half round wire. So we'll cut a nice big piece of wrap wire. And that's what we've got right here. And now what we want to do is, let me grab my flat nose pliers, and we're going to make our hook. So we're going to set this up. Now, since we are using 18 gauge wire, we are going to move the pliers down ever so slightly. So look, I'm kind of about a third of the way down in the jaws of here. That will give me a much wider check mark. So long end up over the tool gives you your check mark. That will set you up to be able to wrap. So we're going to set our wrap wire on our bundle on one side of that cut area. Hold it with your tool, with your flat nose. Actually, I got to readjust just ever so slightly. There we go. And now we're going to start wrapping. So we're going to take the long wire and we're going to bring it up over the bundle. That'll start our first one. And now we're going to just wrap from left to right, unless you're a lefty, and then you do it right to left. Now every couple of these, I flatten this down. So take my pliers and I make sure it's nice and secure against there. So let's do a couple more. We're going to keep doing this all the way across. Now, the interesting thing about 18 gauge wire is that it does not react the same way that smaller wire does. This is stiffer because it's bigger. It takes up a lot of room and can be kind of difficult to work with. But the good thing about it is it adds a lot of strength and stability to the piece. So we're going to do a couple more wraps. Notice I'm setting this about every 2 wraps. That's because the wire is kind of acting weird because of how big it is. So we're going to do a couple more of these. We're almost to the other side. Okay, so we're setting those against the wrap. We're almost to the opposite end of our wrap here. Okay, so we got one. Okay, probably got one more wrap in here. There we go. So we've gone from one side to the other. Now let me show you something I do as an optional thing. Is I will take, let me get everything out of the way. I'll take my bench block and I will take this side that I've wrapped. This is the cut side of the bundle. So this will be the outside. This will be the side everybody sees. And I will take my rawhide mallet and I like to kind of give this a good tap to kind of get everything set up really well. I want this to be a nice firm wrap. So now all that's really left is to trim these off. So take my cutters and I will get in here and I will trim these ends off. And then make sure you're doing this on the side of the wire bundle that you just got done cutting with a file. Okay, so there we go. We've got these set up really well in here. And see, that's what you get. So if you look at the outside, here's our wire bundle. Now we can take the tape off and we can start to use this. We can start turning this now into a bracelet. So the next thing we'll do is we'll move these outer arms into a basic, notice I said basic, bracelet shape. Okay, so let's do that now. The next thing we want to do is we want to take these long wires and we want to start to form them into a bracelet. So I want you to take each one of them and I want you to bend it just like that. So we're going to get this nice curve. Then take the same one but below the wrap and do the same thing, crossing them over like that, right about the center of that wrap. Okay, and then do the same thing with the other side. Take those long wires and I want you to bend them down and then take the other ones and bend them up. Try to get them so they're both crossed over about in the same place. These are going to make up our bracelet wires. So if this is the outside, so don't think I'm ignoring that, but this is kind of what it's gonna start looking like. All right, to form the rest of these where they cross over, and we're doing this strictly with our fingers, I want you to bend that area out so that now the wires are sitting next to each other and they're now going out straight. So do the same thing over here. Just all I'm doing is pinching where I want to bend it and I'm bending it. So I'm pinching it and then I bend the wires outward and try to center these a little bit so that they look good. So that's what we have. So if you think about it, that's going to make up the bracelet. So if we put our stone on here, outside of our stone, we have a nice design. There we go. So once you play around with these, there's one other thing I want to show you too. Now you remember I said on this particular one I added more wire to this. Notice this is where we're at now. If you spread this apart here and you cut a few more pieces of wire and set them in the middle, you can use that to make designs just like I did on this piece. You can use that space to make a wider cuff, to add some more things to that to give it a nice look, give it design. So those are design choices that you can make when doing this. These shapes here can be different. You can open this up. You can fill some of this space with designs and curves, and just simply by adding more in between here for this piece. So here's that idea that I was talking about. So here's where we are. See, and I added this wrap here because I wanted to make sure that these wires had stability. So think about that. Think about ways that you can take this basic design and really change it. But let's go back to what we were doing on our basics here. So here we've got what we're looking for just by adding that. So now let's deal with our prong wires. Let's do that right now. I have the inside of my wire facing me. This is the side we cut. Notice I noted that because I've got my wrap wire cut right there. Okay, so this is facing me. Now, before we can set up these prongs, I want you to do one thing. I want you to get your permanent marker ready. Have it sitting close by, open, because you're going to run out of hands in just a second. Now, take these two wires on the top, and I want you to bring them out about 45 degrees. So they look like antenna. There we go. So now do the same thing with the other ones. Take them and open them up about 45 degrees. Now notice all four of them are about evenly spaced. Take the stone and I want you to center it inside of that and move your prongs around so that they are evenly spaced around it. Now, how do you know if it's done right? You should be able to flip this over. There you go. And notice I'm centered on this stone. So that tells me that I'm in the right place. So now that I've got these all set where I want them, I'm going to take my fine tip permanent marker and I'm going to mark each one of these just outside of the stone. So I am marking each of my prong wires where the stone ends. So there's one, here's number 2, number 3, and bring this around to number 4, recenter it just a little bit. Okay, and then number 4. So now we can take the stone away and we should have 4 marks evenly spaced around our piece. This is where we're going to bend each one to set it up. So let's do that now. So take your flat nose pliers and I want you to go to each one of those marks and I want you to bend the prong wire toward you. So here's the inside of the wrap. This is going to be up against the stone. I bent this away from that. So we'll do all 4 of the prongs that way. So here's number 2. And then number 3 is over here. And then number 4. So now look at your prongs. See how this one's kind of goofy? So we can fix that just a little bit by just bending it just a little bit more, squaring everything up. You want these to be relatively square. Okay, so that's all I did, is I made these 4 prongs. So now if we take our stone, we can set the stone inside of our setting, and it should hold the stone in place now that we get it all in there. See, so now our stone is sitting in. Flip it over. This is the outside of the wrap. This is the clean side, no cuts, no anything. And now we can take each prong and we can kind of push it over the stone ever so slightly. This is going to help us figure out where to cut and measure each one of these prongs so we have a nice piece there. Okay, so let's move on to our next part, and that will be to measure and cut each of these prongs so that they are all even, and then we can shape them a little bit as well. Here we go. So now that we've got the prongs set over the stone ever so slightly, we want to kind of figure out how long we want them. Now you want the prongs to kind of just go onto the stone just a little bit, so it holds the stone into place. So I always measure from the bottom of the stone to see about how far. So I'm talking maybe 5 millimeters. So if you set your work on your table in front of you and you take out your scale and you measure about 5 millimeters from the bottom of the stone. Now this takes a little doing, but there we go. So let's mark it right here with our fine tip permanent marker. So let me show you where we're at. See, so I'm about 5 millimeters. Get my scale back out here and I'll show you. I am approximately 5 millimeters from the bottom of the stone. And I want to repeat that step with all of the rest of the prongs. So hold it and measure every one of your prongs at about 5 millimeters all the way around the piece. And like I said, this takes a little doing. That one I had to kind of fix. I was a little high on that particular one. This is a difficult part because you kind of run out of hands. See, if I were to hold this where I could see everything really well, see, I run out of hands in marking. It becomes very difficult. So be patient with it, but you want to mark all 4 of these prongs so that you can cut them. And that's what we'll do right now. We'll take our wire cutters, now that I am satisfied with where I've got everything, and I will cut each one of these right about where I made each of those marks. There. Couldn't get the pliers to work. So there's our prongs. But now notice these are kind of sharp and they're blunt and they're not very nice looking. So I take the prongs and I open them back up so I could get the stone out. So I open these enough just to be able to get my stone out. And then I take a file. This is one way. I'm going to show you this way and then I'm going to show you a different way. And I file these ends so that they have a nice curve to them. And this again takes a little bit of time, but a little patience, you can get it done. However, see, so I'm just adding, if you notice, I'm just starting to cut into that. But I've got a nice little thing inside of my rotary tool that I like to use to do this. And these are, I have put into my rotary tool, you can use a flex shaft as well. These are silicone rubber polishers, and these are coarse. These will not only cut and shape, but they will polish these tips. So watch what I do. I'm just going to shape this into a nice rounded end. So watch. So now look at the prong that we just did. See how it's got this nice rounded edge to it? I'm going to do the same thing to all 4 prongs. I'll do the same thing with these other 3 prongs, and then we're going to reset the stones. So I'm going to do this off camera, and I'll come back and I'll show you what we've got. So let's show you what I've got. I've got each of my prongs, and now you'll notice they've got a nice shape to them. They're all nice and rounded off. And you also notice that they're really polished up. That does a really good job of polishing and cutting at the same time. So now I can take my stone, I can put it back in to the piece, just like that. And now we can set these into their final place. So taking your flat nose pliers, put one jaw underneath the prong, and then the other tip I want you to get on the top of the prong and just push it down onto the stone. Then go to the opposite one. So we're started here. Let's go to this one down here, and we'll do the same thing. Put it at the bottom, and then push the prong over the stone. And then we'll go to this side here. Make sure it's in the right place that you want it. And then we will put it at the bottom, top, and push this down. And then the final one is at this end, and we want to make sure we're in the right place with it. And we will push it up and onto the stone, and you can just kind of move these around, get them centered where you want them. And so now we've got our prongs all set nice and neatly in place. Stone shouldn't move. So if you kind of shake it back and forth, if it rattles a little bit, if you feel the stone shifting, you're going to want to try and get these prongs set better. To do that, sometimes there's too much space here. So if you take your rawhide mallet and you tap on the side of the prong, so right in here, to kind of knock some of that prong closer to the stone, that works. And I hold the stone with my thumb, and kind of so it doesn't move, I want the wire itself to move. So give it some tapping here, and that will make sure that the stone doesn't rattle. And this one wasn't rattling. I got the setting done pretty well on this. Okay, so now all we have left to do is we need to put some wraps here at the ends and then shape our bracelet into its final shape. So let's do that next. Let's now figure out how long we're going to make this, and we're going to put some wraps in on either side of it. So we need to figure out how large of a bracelet we're going to need. So to do this, you got to figure out who it is you're making it for. If you're making it for someone, you know their wrist size, well then that's the person you want to make this for, so we're going to measure that out for them. This particular one, I am going to measure at about 5 inches. Now, I want you to remember one thing. Let me show you this. Here in the center, between here and here, there's always a gap, and this gap is usually roughly about an inch. This is just almost an inch, 3/4 of an inch. That is the space that's going to go right in here. Okay, that gives you a little leeway with this. So I'm making a 5-inch, so I'm going to center the center of this at 2.5 inches. So it's in the center of my stone. And then I'm going to measure to the right at 5 inches. So here's my 5-inch mark. That's that end. And then we're going to go to this end, still having it centered, and we're going to put it at 0. So that's a 5-inch bracelet that we have. So I'm going to then take those marks and I'm going to put them across all 4 of my bracelet wires, the bracelet shank on here. So we'll put it across all 4. So there's those 4. And lay those down. And let's go across all 4 of those. As we're going to, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to wrap these. So we're going to take some more tape, and I want you to pull off another 2-inch piece of this tape. And I want you to take your scissors, and I want you to cut a piece of tape off of here. And then cut right down the center of it. So now you got two pieces. Now I want you to gather your wires together, and I want you to put this tape outside of the mark that you just made. So notice I'm putting it across those 4 wires outside of that mark. Between here and the end of my wires, that's where I put my tape. So do the same thing on the other side. Gather your wires together nice and neatly, and then I want you to put and make a flag just outside of that. This prepares us now to be able to put a wrap right here at the ends that will hold the outside arms of the bracelet together. And that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to wrap these ends. So now that we've got our wire bundle put together and everything's nice and secure, we know where we're going to do our wraps, we know how long we're going to be making our bracelet, we need to wrap the ends. So pull off some more of your half round wire. So here I'm going to cut about a 6-inch piece of 18 gauge half round wire. Flat side is facing me. I'm going to take my flat nose pliers. I'm going to make my hook, again, my check mark. There it is. We can take it off the tool. Now I want you, this is different, okay? Please note, this is different. I made this mark on the front of the stone so that I could center everything better. You can do the same thing on the back of the stone. I just prefer doing it on the front. So I'm actually going to, I've got a little bit extra here. I'm going to set this on one of those marks that I made, and we're going to wrap from that mark toward the stone. So hold that there, and I want you to do a couple of wraps. So I've got one, this is number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5, and I'm going to end it on the inside of the stone. So what about this one? Well, I'm going to do that too. I'm going to actually grab it, I'm going to set it, and I'm going to bring it to the inside of the stone. And that's where I'm going to trim these ends off, is on this inside part. Notice I'm on the inside of the bracelet. And then we will take flat nose and we will set them down firmly, firmly, firmly in place. So that's what it looks like from the outside. Now, let's do this other side as well. So pull off some more of my wrap wire, about another 6 inches-ish, and we will make our check mark there. We're going to put it on our mark. There. And then we're going to do the same amount of wraps. So we did 5 over here. We're going to do 5 over here. So that's 1. There's number 2. There is number 3. 4. 5. Finish up on the inside. Flip it over. And we'll bring our little tail end and bring it around to the inside as well. Trim off our edges, our ends rather. Take flat nose and set it firmly in place. And always check, when you're using this 18 gauge wrap wire, always check to make sure that it's not, doesn't have sharp edges, because sometimes cutting this, it will give you some sharp edges. Okay, so here's where we're at. Now notice I've got a couple of little marks showing. In this next segment, I'm going to show you how to get rid of those marks, those little permanent markers that we put on the front of our piece. So let's do that, and we're also going to finish off the ends of this. So how do you get rid of this little bit of permanent marker sticking out on each side? Simple. tissue or some type of a cloth and a little bit of nail polish remover. If you put some of this on a cloth, it's like a nice soak here. And if you just take and put it on the mark, it will miraculously disappear. So there. See, so I got some of that permanent marker on here. And all I'm doing is cleaning off that little bit there at the end. Sometimes it takes a little bit of work because I've got it in a really weird place, but there we go. See, so that gets that permanent marker off. Okay, so now what do we do with the ends of the piece? Well, now that we've got this done, we can take the tape off of each side. And we want to finish these ends. To finish the ends, all we're going to do is take flat nose pliers and we're going to go outside of the wrap. So here we're at the final wrap, and we're going to bend them into the center of the piece over this wrap. So this is what we have. We got this little C here. Then we want to take and trim these off. Now I trim them off so that they're about even with the end wrap. Now the wrap is going to start to spread a little bit, and that's fine. Then take flat nose and start to work these up against the wrap. See, so I've closed this off. The next thing you want to do is you want to check this to make sure that it's not sharp. And it is sharp. Mine is sharp. So I'm going to clean this up with a file. I'm going to file that rough edge off. There. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to grab it on the outside of the wrap, and I'm going to bend it into the center. Here's my center of my stone. And then I'm going to trim these short. So if I look down at it, I can see the wrap is right there. And I'm just going to trim across all 4 of those. And then I'm going to push these down and against the wrap. Okay. So there's where our ends look like. That will keep everything. Now this one notice this one I curved more and I pushed it in more. That will prevent that from scratching anybody. Let's just straighten these up just a little bit. So now the last thing we need to do is we need to shape this into an actual bracelet. So now we're going to do that. So the last thing we need to do is we need to shape these arms into an actual bracelet. There's lots of things you can use. Some people have used cans to make the shape. Some people have bracelet mandrels that they use to make the shape. Some people have used a baseball bat. I used to use a baseball bat to get a nice rounded shape. I also use my ring mandrel to do that, and it's real simple to do. I usually just start right here at the end. I'm using the thickest part of my ring mandrel, and I'm holding the wrap at the end, and I'm just going to bend this around. See, now notice what I'm doing. I'm bending this into a bracelet shape, and then I can do this. And after I get kind of the basic shape I want to kind of tap it with a rawhide mallet to kind of harden my metal a little bit so that it stays in place and doesn't move out of place. And you can always go and kind of give it a final shape here. And we'll do the same thing here on the other end. Get the ring mandrel. And on the other end, we will hold the wrap, and we will start to shape this around the mandrel until we get the shape that we want. And we can kind of play with this just a little bit. And you want that gap right here, about 3/4 of an inch to an inch gap is fine. That gives you a little leeway with shaping this. So this is what we end up with. We end up with a nice bracelet. Turns out really nice in this copper. Now, you can also patina this copper. Put a little liver of sulfur on it. That would give it that antiqued look. That would be really nice for this. But double check everything. Make sure you've got everything so it's not scratching. Make sure everything's nice and even and level. But that's it. That's all you need to do with this. Very simple project for you to do. And now we have a 5-inch. And the reason why I made this 5 inches is because my wife wears a 5-inch bracelet. So you make these any size that you want, but I made this so that she could wear it. Wasn't that a fun bracelet to make? What a wonderful, simple thing to do. Gives you a lot of versatility. You can use any size, any shape stone. Here's another thing you can do with that, is instead of having just one prong around the stone, add 2 more prong wires, and you can have 2 prongs at each corner. Just like in the sample piece I made, that piece of Fordite, I put 2 prongs on each corner of that piece. Plus, notice the shape of that particular stone. I had a really oddly shaped stone. I was able to put prongs around it, so even use different stones. Add extra wire that maybe you can bring around the top of the stone to give you a little bit of a curve and some shape on the stone. Not just the prongs, but maybe just make some designs over the stone. Use the area around the sides of the bracelet to add some more shape and design to it. There's so many things you can do. This was the basic, okay? Remember that. That's the basic one. Take your time. Make this your own. That's what wire wrapping is all about. That's a great thing about wire wrapping. The great thing about wiresmithing is that these things can be, if you use your imagination, you can add all kinds of things to it. And it's a wonderful piece to do. So I hope you enjoyed it. As always, I'm going to ask you everything. Give me a like. I always like to do that. So hit the like button for me. I crack myself up. Got to do something to break up the monotony, right? Also, make sure you're subscribed. If you're new here, if this is the first time you've visited, please hit the subscribe button. Hit the bell also so you get all the alerts as to when we're putting out some new tutorials and some new Hot Tip Tuesdays. Check those out. Also, go over to my channel and check out some of my playlists now. We've got all of our stuff organized. We're getting there to organize everything into some playlists so that you can really get some good quality tutorials and tips that are going to help you out on your journey to creating great wire art. Okay? So thanks for stopping in. Please leave me a comment below. Also check out the description below. That's where all of the information is for the tools and the materials you'll need, the sizes you'll need. Everything you need is down there in that description, and there's a bunch of links that you can go to. Check those out as well. Okay? So thanks for stopping by, and I want you to remember, you know what I'm going to say, practice, practice, practice.